I am delighted today to be joined by the panelists here. Alexandra Prager, head of Kinexys at JP Morgan. David Markley, COO at XSY. Griffin Peer, head of business development at Reserve. And James Newman, managing and general partner at Republic. Since this is supposed to be half an hour, let's do a really quick intro. I'm Ray. I lead product and research at Grayscale. My team, we're building bridges to tie crypto back to institutional investing. Alexandra?
Hi, I'm Alex. I run Kinexys Labs at JP Morgan in our blockchain unit Kinexys, focused on building next-gen infrastructure and growing our digital asset platforms.
I'm David at XE. We build yield infrastructure for digital dollars. And so as Anthony alluded to, you're not allowed to earn yield on stable coins yet. We've got you covered.
Hi, everyone. I'm Griffin. I'm at Reserve Protocol, which is a DeFi protocol that allows people to launch indexes of on-chain assets. So you can kind of think of it like ETFs, but fully on-chain, self-custodial, and permissionless.
James Newman, managing partner at Republic, where I run our flagship venture fund.
Great, let's kick it off. So we have been talking for years, I think since I joined the space in 2018, about institutional adoption for crypto. Now, a lot of what we've seen has been at the investment level, ETFs, but what are we actually seeing in terms of institutions using the crypto infrastructure itself? Alexandra and David, you guys are working on different solutions. From where you sit, what still needs to be built to support the institutional use case?
Yeah, sure. I'll go first. So the Kinexys team's been around since 2015, so we're now 10 years in. And I definitely still think there is ways to go. There's three things on my side that I think are really important for institutional adoption. The first is identity and reusable identity on chain. I think it would make onboarding a lot more efficient. It would create, ease of access to different products. And so that's a big one for us. The second is the ability to see your entire portfolio in one place and to have back-end systems that can actually connect into the Web3 rails. If you took a look inside what actually happens post-trade in a custody system or in an asset servicing system, it would scare you. And the third one is honestly clear on-chain compliance. So there are tons of great monitoring tools out there and lots of available information, but really distilling that into a way that can pave the way for institutional adoption at scale. Those are the three things I think about a lot.
The answer is quite simple. We just need more DATs, and everybody will pile in. But in a more serious light, there's actually, so prior to starting XE, I was at Algorand to help grow that team from the early innings. And one of the things that I think is still a big gap in the industry is network level governance. The kind of more tactical example that my colleague Austin likes to use is, what if we put your grandmother's house, her title, on chain, and then North Korea hacks it? Does North Korea now own your grandmother's house? And sure, the asset issuer might be able to just issue another token, but then what was the point of the token in the first place? And so we not only need issuance level controls, but we also need network level controls to be able to provide this trust that the rest of the industry needs to participate.
Agreed. So Griffin, from your seat and how you guys are approaching things, how are you thinking about design and how is that manifesting in version 2?
Yeah, I think one way we're thinking about design is that we don't know what's going to win, and we don't pretend to. You see a lot of treasury companies that are launching a lot of stable coins, whether yield bearing or stable, a lot of staking products and vaults. And so we really wanted to focus on building a permissionless infrastructure that allows players to experiment and launch products that will ultimately be up to the market to decide what wins. So in the index space, you have like Coin50, you have Bitwise 10, CMC 100, and a lot of them are competing for the de facto like S&P 500 equivalent in crypto. And what we want to do is create the infrastructure to allow these companies to kind of compete to build products and offer these solutions to end customers.
So let's talk about actually bringing these products to market. Griffin and James, you guys have launched live products. You've helped structure, and distribute tokenized assets. What's the hardest thing about doing that?
I'll take a stab at this first. I think it's matching what is technically possible with what is operationally and regulatory compliant and actually feasible. A lot of stuff is technically feasible from a kind of on-chain perspective, but a lot of the primitives that institutions need are off-chain, whether it be compliance, AML, checking who an individual is, etc. And that needs to be matched with the on-chain side of things that we're building. I think what we need to kind of all understand is that this is an overhaul of the underlying technical stack for a lot of businesses, and that takes time. And we're relatively early in that journey, and therefore we need to have that ability to match between on and off chain before everything becomes on chain. For example, like on-chain KYC and identity is something that is paramount if we're going to operate secondary markets that are purely on chain.
And from my perspective, on the BD side especially, I think the biggest hurdle and challenge isn't actually going from idea to product. It's once you have a product that's live, getting institutions to actually use it and getting kind of that first partner to stick their neck out and take a leap of faith and either build something or use your product. And so you can have all the bug bounties and audits in the world, but at the end of the day, like if it's a new primitive or a new type of product, institutions are going to be skeptical of what they're not familiar with. And so it's really about finding the right first partner to take that leap of faith with you. And then I think after that, all the subsequent conversations get easier. And it's something that we kind of experienced with our launch. And if you partnered with this household name and it got past their compliance, then that makes sense. There's no reason why my compliance department should shut it down.
And so, James, from your perspective, from an investment perspective, where are you seeing the demand for right now?
In terms of products, I think there's really two places, and one of them is on cash or kind of yield-bearing instruments, i.e. stablecoins, which clearly from a VC investment standpoint is pretty saturated. There's a lot of very interesting products out there, but it's just dissecting between what are the kind of better operational ones. The second part is obviously tokenization of private markets, whether that be private funds or private securities. And I think that's especially interesting given there's a why. The demand and supply have a why. From a supply perspective, it's about accumulating assets, democratization, allowing retail and those type of equivalents to invest in these types of products. And from a demand standpoint, it's the same. It's democratization, it's portfolio diversification. There's a number of reasons why people want access to these products. If we think about the S&P over the last 50 years or 60 years, a lot of the growth in the index has been from a few names, and at the moment it's the Amazons, the Teslas, etc. And with the current stance of private versus public companies, there's a lot of companies that are staying private either forever or for a longer period of time, which means that a lot of accumulation of wealth is done in the early stages before these things get listed. And therefore, the people that are left out are those that are not accredited investors, that are not professionals, that are not funds, and in particular retail. And that's something that will drive demand for these things, and there will become innovative solutions like what Robinhood is proposing. And when there is demand, there generally becomes solutions that will eventually come to the masses.
So I want to do some round robin questions because those are fun. First of all, again, taking a big step back, we've talked about the adoption, but what does good look like? What is like one thing or two things? What are one is one thing, or what are two things that you might see that will make you feel like, yeah, this is where we should be. Institutions are really using this stuff. Anybody jump in? This is a free-for-all.
Sure, I'll go first. I think on my side, what would be really incredible would be to have scalable on-chain privacy solutions and to have them be able to move at pace with what institutions expect from any type of product.
Okay, so speed and scale.
Speed and scale of privacy solutions.
Privacy.
Yeah.
speed and scale.
Yeah, in terms of infrastructure and what good looks like for larger institutions, one of the things that we spend a lot of time at Exi is trying to set the gold standard for reserve attestation, transparency reporting, because I think a common theme amongst all of us is that trust is kind of the last mile here, where you need trusted infrastructure, you need trusted counterparties, and then you need trusted, oversight of the entire system. And so, yeah, for me, working on self-service transparency, 24/7 collateral attestations, and bridging the gap between basically what traditional finance is accustomed to today and the products that we're launching in DeFi.
I think something that is key to solve for in order to get to this good state is fragmentation of both liquidity, or fragmentation of liquidity across chains, but also across assets. So there's so many, everyone's familiar with the issue of cross-chain liquidity and kind of fragmentation there, but also there's so many competing assets of the same underlying that even further fragment liquidity and really are a constraint to scaling and for large-scale institutional adoption. And so I think abstracting away or solving for those fragmentation issues and getting really deep liquidity will be key to solve for in order to move forward.
I'd agree with all three of the panelists, but one thing I would say is just obscuring away the fact that there's a blockchain, like hiding the rails, I think is most paramount. I think that's when the technology really takes off and we see tokenization more broadly or on-chain activity as the feature rather than a solution or like the product.
And the moderator, no one cares what I think, but I agree. I think speed, scale, I think composability is a big problem. I'm hopeful that it gets solved in the next 2 to 3 years. And then just UX, I think user interface, there's just so much, there's a long ways to go there. Okay, so let's say that things work out. What do we think is actually realistic? So picking like an arbitrary time frame, 5 years from now, what do you think realistically gets done?
I think building off of what we were just saying, abstracting away from the tech and actually be able to have, say, like a large IPO on chain, an end-to-end activity without realizing you're actually using a blockchain in the background. Like, I think if we can get to that place, that would be extremely exciting, and I think all the signals are there.
You think we get there in 5 years?
I like to be optimistic. I think we can get most of the way, hopefully.
Yeah, it's an interesting question to answer because success, I think, really depends on where you are geographically. Like clearly the Genius Act is such a win for people who historically have not had access to dollar rails. And now as long as you have an internet connection and a mobile device, there's some other steps still involved, but literally you have access to dollars. And so I think success in 5 years is that people will now be able to denominate their entire life savings in dollars who historically just haven't had that opportunity, right? Here in the US, sending money from, Boston to New York is like quite trivial. And so maybe not the first place where stablecoins get adopted, but sending money from Boston to Thailand, I think that'll be a much deeper and earlier penetration. And so yeah, I'd love to see in 5 years' time, majority of international payment remittances run on top of stablecoins.
I'd echo Alex's point on abstraction away from crypto. I think having products where the end user doesn't need to know that they're using crypto rails, they just care that they're happy they're what they want to get accomplished is getting accomplished. And so at the protocol side, like we're big believers of what we call the DeFi mullet. So like traditional UX in the front, DeFi rails in the back. And an example of this is like Coinbase offering Bitcoin loans where the end, the underlying loan is actually morpho decentralized lending markets. And this is completely removed from the end user and they're just using the Coinbase infrastructure and kind of app that they're familiar with. And I think this will accelerate adoption even further because it reduces kind of that educational hurdle and that operational hurdle because it meets users where they are and where they're comfortable. And so I think that's kind of what winning looks like in my mind.
Yeah, I'd go back to the point about just obscuring away the technology. I'd say also over the next 5 years, we probably will start to see that, especially in stablecoins or cash payments. I think people won't understand necessarily how the banking rails work. I think most people in this room don't understand how the SWIFT network, for example, works. I would say that success probably looks like bringing blockchain technology or the use cases to create greater efficiencies for the masses. And I think that's where I stand.
And what do you think, sort of quickly, that in 5 to 10 years we'll still be struggling with, but that it's worth the struggle?
Yeah, I think that there'll be a few different things. The biggest one on my mind would be being able to actually integrate all of our back-end systems. There's amazing products that we can put on chain. There's demand across the board. But if we think about, the legacy technology that all of our companies likely sit on to some extent, or our clients have in the back, that's going to take a long time.
Something you brought up a couple times, identity. Having an on-chain representation, I don't think is the challenge. The global legal system and the correspondence and making sure Coinbase's KYC AML regime aligns with Binance's, which aligns with the Japanese bank, which aligns with, that is just a massive legal global coordination problem. It is by far the biggest unlock to moving all money on chain. But yeah, we should pursue it. I don't think we solve it in the next 5 years.
I think something in my mind is governance and decentralized governance. It's really complicated and messy right now, and is a big hindrance to growth. And I think for a lot of the institutions in this room, decentralization is probably a bug, not a feature. It's kind of scary to have this faceless entity that's controlling a product or a infrastructure that you're working on. And also there isn't, someone to point the finger at and blame if anything goes wrong. And that is really unfamiliar and kind of introduces these unknown variables that I think is gonna have to be solved for in order to increase adoption and really move forward on decentralized infrastructure.
I think identity is obviously one of them, and also the integration of back office systems. But I think we'll make significant headway in the next 5 to 10 years. From my perspective, it's more about kind of global harmonization of either the regulatory landscape or the kind of operational side of things. Even if you look at traditional finance, across the globe, there's different rules, there's different ways you can transact. And I don't see that being any different on the digital side. And so that's fair.
So we're getting a little close to time, but is there anything that any of you feel like we haven't sufficiently covered that you would like to leave the audience with?
I'll double down on the governance comment. We saw the first instance of this at scale with SWE and the validators coordinating to do a rollback so that they could protect user funds that had been, basically stolen in their DEX hack. I think that is actually something that this industry is sleeping on, where I think that becomes more of the norm, and that's going to be the expectation that all asset issuers have. I mean, the second that BlackRock's private keys get hacked, the validators are going to be faced with an interesting question, right? And so I think over time, that's actually going to become more of a selection criteria for blockchain networks and which ones people issue on top of.
Yeah, the accountability is critical, and especially in the case of the Cetus hack, it wasn't even SWE infrastructure, right? It wasn't the blockchain. The blockchain was fine. This was an app that was built on the blockchain, and so they stepped up and they corrected that, and I think that is a really awesome thing to see.
But it goes to this core question of what is decentralization?
Yeah.
How do you coordinate that at scale? When do you activate that? Do you consider it a centralized network? I mean, the irony that we're building these decentralized networks that now need all these centralized layers of control is, I think it's something that we don't talk about enough.
Well, it takes you back to 2016 and Ethereum and ETH Classic, and it's, I think it's been a question in crypto since time immemorial, is that when do you interfere, or blockchain's meant to be immutable? Do you just let whatever happens happen? So yeah, it's a fun topic for sure.
Yeah, and especially with the panel being on, institutional adoption too, it's kind of like you have to go back to, okay, what is a blockchain good for? What is it not good for? What should be on chain? What should not be on chain? I think taking that stance a little bit back and to say, okay, a purist view would be this. A fully conservative institutional view would be this. It's probably somewhere in the middle, but I think getting everyone to the same middle is definitely an exercise.
Yeah, that's a really salient point, because I think in the time that I've been in crypto, everybody gets excited periodically about just putting everything on the blockchain. Like, oh, I'm going to tokenize my self-esteem and put it on the blockchain. And like, that's not a thing that needs to be on the blockchain.
What's it trading at?
Like 2. That's me. Okay, how about some audience questions? I feel like that's a fun note to end on. Okay, great. Well, we are 1 minute over time. Thank you to my esteemed panelists, and thank you everybody for listening.